We are recording. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming to have this little chat. We hoped to have another guy at Trio, but he's not able to come because he has a problem with his child. So we have to do without him. I expected to ask 3 questions today, but I think we have to do with only 2. It's about the future, some kind of prediction. And I really like a prediction because I think it's a good thing to think about what is happening now, what happened in the past, and from these 2 elements to try to understand what is going to happen in the future. So prediction is mainly not about to be right. It's about to think about everything. So the question is, the first one, what do you think the BRICS are going to be in 5 years? And the second question is going to be, after the first one, what do you think NATO is going to be in 5 years? So at first, think I'm pretty sure Prata about absolutely to speak about us of the BRICS. Prata, what do you think of this question?
Well, it's very interesting. From my analysis, hello everybody, so I'm from Portugal. As I was saying, so it's a bit of a fringe in Europe, so we also tend to have a different perspective of the world, a more relationate one. I think if a person comes from Central Europe or one of those big countries, he probably will have a different perspective, how the world works and so on. So my educated guess would be that the BRICS can become a lot of things. But one of the things I realized that by starting this conversation is that most people, most analysis that we hear on YouTube, even in newspapers, strategists and so on, tend to have a kind of a fantasized idea of what the BRICS really are. So they expect more. And if you expect more from them, you will say they will make failures. If you realize how they started and what was the main purpose and how since 2006, but actually 2009 was the first meeting of BRICS, all the events that we had, the big events in the world in terms of financial and geopolitics, namely the 2009 crisis. So that's also one of the big reasons why BRICS will actually institutionalize in 2009, following a first meeting in 2006. And then again, the crisis, the monetary crisis in Europe, 2011, where the International Monetary Fund gave so much money to certain European countries that some developing countries were really mad because they never got any type of facilitation in getting financial support from IMF before. And then 2 little European countries, which are actually quite rich, get most of the money for themselves. An amount that was never seen in the IMF before. And then we have the crisis of 2014. This is a geopolitical crisis when Russia started decoupling from the West. And we also have the pandemic crisis, which actually accelerated many of the geopolitical shifts that we were seeing in the world for the last 10 years. And yes, so if you understand what exactly the BRICS came and how they developed, we should say BRICS is a story of extreme success in very little time. Since 2009, what they were able to accomplish is amazing. If you actually see it in a fantasized idea that the BRICS will be the new alternative, then you will be disappointed because they are creating things that never existed before in the world. And you can't expect everything just to happen like this. And also not realizing what brings these countries together and what makes them making these summits every year might not be what many people wish the BRICS to be. So there are many differences. We have China, we have India, we have Russia, we have South Africa, which appeared later in 2010 2010, I presume. It entered later, so there was first BRIC, and that was BRICS. But even before BRICS, and I think this is interesting to say, there was RIC. RIC was a very old meetings between Russia, India, and China, which had mainly the idea, first of all, to integrate, to bring China and India a bit more together and avoid the conflict. And with the time, as things got a bit more quiet, they actually were developing positions in terms of international positions, so a diplomatic consultation. So what we understand is that when they put the B in 2006 in that foreign ministers meetings that have been happening for a long time, joining Brazil with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, which has become recently again the president of Brazil. Lula, he wanted to create a new perception of what is geopolitics, as a kind of a global south. The concept of global south still didn't really exist. We were just talking about third world, already with a different meaning of what really third world means, about developing countries, poor countries, ACP countries. And Lula wanted to create a kind of a togetherness with the countries in the south, that they could go and also bring their problems to the discussions, because at those times, especially when the crisis of 2009 came to light, we were just talking about the rich people. Nobody cared about the problems that the poor countries had and what they could do in order to improve their lives.
So you think you think that the BRICS could be a platform for the, I'm going to call it the rest of the world, to speak about their problem?
It was created for that, and it's still pretty much that. It talks about the problems of the global south and tries to create alternatives at the same time. But these alternatives, like the new development bank, were actually created because, that institution was actually created because the IMF didn't show any signs of wanting to reform itself. Countries like Brazil and China were saying they wanted to have a bigger voice in the IMF decisions.
Excuse me. So you position the BRICS at the opposite side of the IMF?
In the certain case, yes, because the IMF has been unwilling to change. It changed a bit. There was China and Brazil. They had their quota hired, but at the same time, there's still this discussion after the pandemic. We see how many poor countries are still unable to get help from the IMF, but Ukraine got it immediately with the blink of eyes. So the problems with IMF and the way the decision making is taken is still there. So go on, Shadovi. I hope
I'm listening for the moment. Yeah. So the question was, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years?
Yes, what I think it's going to happen in 5 years, this is almost for sure, as we see from the way that the West, in a kind of desperation, has been using almost all the international fora and international institutions to controlling them, to expose those, to use it in their favor when they have a problem. This has created a stronger need to create institutions that are more impartial, more neutral, less conditioned from just a group of countries blocking the life of the common goal of humanity, let's say like this, because this is also one of the ideas of the BRICS of the Global South, is the idea of common goal of humanity. I don't think, like many people see this like an opposition, like Shadovi was saying. I don't see the Global South trying to expel the North, or the Northeast actually, because it's just the west of the planet. I don't think they want to put them away. They just want them to realize that they also have a place in the world.
So
and
you
they want
think
also
in 5 years? What?
Yes, what I think in 5 years. Trying to answer, I don't want to predict too much, but my idea is...
I want you to predict.
Yes, I think there will be the creation of new institutions that will enable for instance, payment systems and global finances not to be hijacked by some group of countries. So they are going to create alternative institutions. This is most for sure. You won't see it in the next summit, there will be important decisions in the next summit of the BRICS in August in South Africa. But in 5 years, we can count on it. There will be alternative institutions for international payments,
so
for
you think in 5 years the
settlement.
BRIC is going to be changed with a lot of reform
There
for
will
the
be
economical side?
Yes, there will be an alternative for payments and for financial institutions, an alternative of the money, because if I'm not mistaken, yes, they are
in
going
5
to.
years. Okay.
Yeah, they are going to introduce pretty much already soon. Most of these countries are going to introduce a digital coin. This is something that everybody was been talking about, but the BRICS had decided officially a few summits ago that they wanted to introduce a digital coin. China had very good experience with it. Russia had, for a few months, also a test study, and now they are officially introducing it. So what's the digital money? The digital money is
yes,
instead
please.
of...
I think we know.
No, it's very easy. It's like a banknote, but doesn't exist in paper. It exists in a digital number. So this is the difference. And for that, you don't need a bank. So this is the big revolution, because you can transfer that digital coin from from a digital device to another digital device without the existence of a bank. And this is the thing. If this is really what they've been saying they want to create, this will be a revolution.
We'll see.
Yes.
So economical side reform, okay.
Yes.
And for political
the other
side,
one, I think, is that they will enable poor countries to have a kind of a way of coming to exposing better their problems. So kind of a forum. So we'll probably see the BRICS joining, more countries joining the BRICS as well. I think it's most for sure the new 5 countries are going to join the BRICS this year, and more countries will join the next years. But one should not forget, these countries have very different perspectives, very different needs. And if we see what we are going to see now, this is like, I hope this doesn't last 5 years, but I think Drew is a good panelist of the Open Mic in defense politics. Actually said something very interesting. What we see now is like a dual world forming. One is the West, something like 40 countries, and the rest is the rest of the world. The rest of the world is not united. There's many powers inside, but they try to make a kind of a more democrat, more well-balanced network of relations with themselves, with new institutions, with more democrat decision-making, and so on.
So you think the BRICS is going to be these things?
Yes, and I think
going to allow the rest of the world to
come
share
together,
their point of view, and to come together. Yes.
Yeah, create a forum where these people have more ability to come forward and show their problems. But at the same time,
basically, it's going to split the United Nations between two sides.
Because the West wants. But this will be for a short time. Drew said something very intelligent. We see globalization growing in many parts of the world, within Africa, within Central Asia, all Asia together. Countries that are creating bigger economical relationships with themselves without the presence of Western companies or Western powers. And what we can imagine is that after a while, the Western countries, enclosured by their self-decision, they will start to create networking with BRICS or with the rest of the world. If it's not going to be the BRICS that's going to organize them, whatever it comes, but they will try to connect and they will try to integrate on the BRICS. So I think the multipolar world is coming. It won't be coming as soon as people want. I think the idea of true is very good. First, we'll have a kind of a bipolarization where one is enclosing himself and the other ones are growing within themselves. And somewhere in time, they want to jump in. The Western countries will also want to jump in. So we saw France already thinking about that.
And the last question, Potter, do you think there is going to be a military side in this organization?
No. If something, just a SCO, which is also a very important organization, it's also growing. Is more regional, is more Asian, but they concentrate 60% of the population in the planet, nevertheless. And the SCO might develop two sides, not really military, but even more integrated military information capacities. And on the other side, develop into real economical sphere, because at the moment there are also not military. They are more like they try to resolve problems that go within challenge like terrorism, interconnectability, knowing how each country works and giving informations. But I think Shu would be more able to explain what SCO is than me.
Thank you, Pata, for your long speech.
Yeah, long, very long. You shouldn't let me talk so long.
Now I'm going to ask coping. Basically the same question.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Plata, for that albeit lengthy but still very important preamble, as you did actually, adequately outline the history of BRICS and put it into context, which let's just put it like this. I have also quite a lot to say, and I think I would rather, if I can, pass it over to my fellow panelists, so I can answer the question later.
It was just a focus on the question. So, in 5 years, let's begin with the economical side.
So,
what is going to change?
My perception is that in 5 years, BRICS as an alternative. Not as a dominating factor, but as an alternative, is going to be a familiarity. It's going to be a given. And this is probably what will be with BRICS, is that they will have an increased market share of the commodities that they choose to tie up to their currency. So I'm not going to go into so much detail there, but I can say that this ties quite a lot to the so-called BRICS Bank, the NDB, which enables loans. And it is... so I can give an example. Ghana is one of the biggest gold producers in the world, especially when you consider its size and population. Its economy, however, 70% of the government revenue goes straight to servicing debt, not even paying it down, it's just servicing it. So let's say Saudi Arabia joins BRICS, which seems to be the most likely. That will give an immense amount of capital liquidity to the BRICS Bank. And that will enable BRICS, if they choose to decide that, well, Ghana is a relatively small economy with the debt is very high, but it's not much for us really to just wipe off. We can pay that debt, and then they can pay us under more favorable terms, because the BRICS Bank does have actually some clauses. When it does conduct loans, 1/3 of the loan is to be denominated in the local currency, which protects the borrower, the debtor, from exchange rate risks, which is often very harmful for the long run. So I think BRICS will be very, very noticeable for it's just by simply having from the outset very favorable terms that is also beneficial for the BRICS countries themselves. It's going to gravitate a whole lot of countries that have up until now not really had much of a choice. Like Ghana stepped, just to use the same example, it has had its debt for 50, 60 years, right?
So for you, the BRICS in 5 years for the economical side is going to have an increase in its banking activity.
Both banking and market share of commodities. It's going to be
Do you see currency like Pata?
Come again?
Do you see a new currency in 5 years for the BRICS? Do you think there is going to be a new currency?
The currency I am quite certain of, yes, but I do not see it as being as a hand-to-hand currency as a dollar, for example. It will be more of an exclusive trading currency, not too dissimilar from what the IMF has, which is called the SDR. which is basically just an index in many regards. So they will be using it as a deferment of payment and stuff like that, using bilateral swap lines. But then they will have the unit of account and stuff like that. They will use it. They won't be using it ubiquitously as the dollar is used.
Not really a currency, but some kind of trading mechanism to allow the BRICS country to facilitate trade between themselves.
Yes, actually, I think Drew would be very good at answering that one. So I will be just saying yes. Yeah. So
okay. So for the political side now, please. Hoping. Do you think there's going to be political change in BRICS?
I think it's already shown. I think for example, the ICC will be replaced, or like disregarded, and then the BRICS countries will find their own arrangement, what they consider to be. They'll probably just copy much of the UN Charter without having supreme veto power like the Security Council. Or I think I'm not here. I have to admit I'm speculating very much because I don't have a clear picture what that would look like. But it seems inevitable that they will need something like that to manage I think it will be difficult for them to keep it strictly economical. So I do see political institution rising without saying much more on that.
Okay, so do you think there is going to be a military side for the BRICS?
Not official one. Like if you're thinking like NATO and such, or the UN peacekeepers, maybe something like UN peacekeepers for BRICS members only, maybe something like that. But apart from that, I don't really see. It could happen, of course, but it doesn't seem like it is a high priority or on the agenda, really. The countries in question are generally, the main countries here. They're not going to be attacked by even NATO. Neither Russia, nor India, nor China, nor Brazil, and frankly, I don't even think South Africa. So militarily, they don't seem to need that kind of institution, even with NATO as a seeming counterpart. That's my perception, at least.
Saying the same thing. So, Shu, your turn now. What do you think in 5 years for BRICS?
Yeah, so thank you everybody for speaking. I think some really interesting points have been brought up, but I just want to start off with, I think to see the future, you kind of look at the past, and in some ways, just the simple nature of BRICS existing, coming from like the RIC format, Russia, India, China, is quite interesting, and I think it changes the philosophy of like its objectives and its goals, because a lot of people look at BRICS and then they wonder how these countries can get along. But then when you actually look at it, like it comes from a non-dialectical kind of point of view. It's not about different forces, they must oppose each other, but instead it comes from a goal of cooperation. For example, the China-India conflict. But then also BRICS is quite inviting to other countries as well. So I think the first major place that it can change, and this will probably determine its future, is if it is able to integrate traditionally opposing powers. For example, the two big ones, Saudi Arabia and Iran, which were recently negotiated to reestablish connections. If this BRICS becomes a forum where like general geopolitical opposition can be mediated through economics, through dialogue, I think it will be very successful. The second part is that the geographic scope of BRICS. So right now it's confined to Eurasia, I think, and in terms of its power base for its great powers, we do have South Africa, we do have Brazil, but if these other countries, such as like applications from Mexico, from Nigeria, and other countries spread around the world, I think it would actually change the scope of BRICS to the point where, as others have said, like maybe it would be IMF versus BRICS because it's so large that it can't be ignored. But eventually, if you look at how the countries in BRICS are, almost every single country has trade with the other side. There's no isolation between it. So then the kind of ball is in the court of, we could say, the G7 or the Western world to see if they want to trade with them, because BRICS does have a few advantages: commodities, population, geography, that if you don't trade with them, then you're self-isolating yourself. But BRICS will always want to trade with the other side. simply from its format, right? And each country has different goals, but they can work together as a collective pool. And I do believe and agree with points that were brought up earlier that BRICS does give a platform to countries that may not have had as much to say, especially in economics.
Okay.
I think this is a map.
Yes.
This is a great map.
Mm-hmm.
It expands exactly what Chu was saying. If they advance to the countries they are really applied, and the countries are interested, then more countries will try further.
Okay,
and
but
this
just
will
before
be a
that,
very well platform.
please. I'm going to let Batcat tell us what he thinks about BRICS in 5 years.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you for having me the first time. I've got maybe some unique perspective to share, and you know, it's a big topic, but just also wanted to give my personal take on this first, mentioning some things that have not been mentioned so far, and giving you some different angle on that BRIC take. One, I think that there's two main reasons why the BRICS have been you know, created, that alliance, and one thing that we haven't mentioned so far is the US, right? It's to provide an alternative to the dominance of the US and the West, I would say, but it's mainly the US. When you see an alliance of countries with Russia, you can't avoid the opposition with the US. The second element, I think it's fundamental to understanding how these countries operate. They are fundamentally self-serving, right? So they are not creating an alliance for the greater good of humanity or the rest of the world. This alliance is here to serve their own interests and to develop their own country, first and foremost. So when I look at the future, I'm not looking at the BRICS as becoming alternative to IMF or other worldwide organizations, because that's not in their interest. One of the things that we want to stay is neutral, not try to involve themselves in big major conflicts, and benefit, right? In terms of economy, they will want to grow as fast as they can, as quick as they can. They have huge potential for growth. So the current war in Ukraine provided them huge opportunity to access cheap energy from Russia, amongst others, and they are hugely benefiting from it. I'm thinking about India, for instance. And they have a huge demand internally for that energy that will obviously lead to economic growth. So, huge economic growth in the next 5 years. They are going to become independently major powers, right? India just passed the UK and France, and now is in top 5 in terms of economy, and it's only going to go up. In terms of political growth in 5 years, I still see them as stable, independent power. Their power will come from the fact that they will grow their economy and they will grow their military. Again, there have been contracts. I mean, India has been a lot in the news lately, but there's been contract that just been signed for the acquisition of military fighter jet, right, from France. So they're all growing in economy, growing in military power. They kind of secured a stable political landscape. China, India have stable leaders. The others have leaders that have been there, that are popular, that are going to be there for a long time. So there's no political instability, which is very important for them. So they're going to grow as major powers, even bigger, and they're going to collectively form a significant alternative to the current one side of the world that we have, which is led by the US. And that's going to be, for me, the major difference. In 5 years' time, it's not going to be a one-side world, right? There's going to be several poles in the world, led by these BRICS countries.
Okay, so Potter, you were saying?
Yes, I wanted to add something also quite interesting, because the power, what kind of powers each empire had some kind of monopoly of a type of power that was enabling him to grow. So the U.S. was actually its attraction for the American dream somehow. It created a very attractive culture and made people almost spontaneously adhere to it. But that ability that the U.S. had to create such an attractive narrative has gone down. It doesn't attract anymore. Actually, some developments in their culture, especially its radicalization, polarization inside of their culture, which already expanded to Europe, has become actually a kind of despise for many countries around the world.
You understand that we are going to have a subject about NATO in a few minutes, so please.
Yeah, but that's a more military one.
Maybe you should keep that for the other question.
Yeah, okay. But that's. I was trying to give the idea that some of the attraction of the BRICS will be they also present a development process that works, because you see the United States had this attraction, but it never really developed nobody. With the exception of some countries in the north of Europe that were very poor and now are very rich, like Finland, Norway, or Sweden. These countries were, after the Second World War, very poor. They used to be not very developed, and they become very developed and very powerful nowadays. But with that exception, almost no country in the world really developed within the model of development the U.S. was presenting. But China did something different. The development model is actually very attractive. It has been implemented and makes societies grow. They construct infrastructure. And this infrastructure allows new markets to create around and inside those countries. And those countries are growing economically amazingly, wherever China invested so much. So I think this model of development that promise you a better living instead of a better brain, that's what they want. They want to leave. They want the model of development of the West is that you will develop your individuality, you will be free, more liberal, and so on. But this has gone down, as we see, especially through the polarization. But what the BRICS are presenting, it's something different. They are promising you almost, we can develop your life, you can develop your life through a conscious awareness of your development, of your traditions, of your natural environment around you. And this will be very attractive. So we see the soft power of Russia.
I'm going to make a summary of what you say. They just speak about money and nothing else.
Who?
BRICS.
Yes, they speak about money, exactly. They speak
and
about...
they don't want to speak about anything else. Anything else has to come for your own country.
Yes, exactly.
We are just going to speak about money. For everything else, you do it yourself.
They present you a development model which is based on the creation of infrastructure, more or less, and trade. And this enables these countries to develop from within with their traditions and their internal environments. And this is very attractive. And also we see Russia with their soft power of protector of the conservative family values. This is also very attractive to many of these countries as well. So that was it.
Someone want to add something about the BRICS?
Yeah. If I could just add some small thing, yeah, very good. I think BRICS might have in the near future two major phases. Probably the first one will be in the first 5 years. I think if Iran and Saudi Arabia can join, it would open up a large amount of dialogue between countries in the Middle East to establish just a trade bloc. They will deal with each other's cultural differences, and then it'll just put a precedent for the other countries. I think the second phase is quite interesting because BRICS is the economic alliance, and economics of the modern world are quite dependent on free trade. If you actually look at the BRICS countries, I would see two major hotspots. If the Central American applicants from Mexico and Nicaragua would express dialogue interest, if they can join or actually get more integrated, that actually opens up a lot more trade within the Western Hemisphere. The second one that's probably overlooked a lot by a lot of the world is that Indonesia, being such a major population center, is also in some ways like a bit behind India and other developing countries, even Brazil and Nigeria. But if that country actually falls within there, trade within the Asia Pacific will become a lot more stable in some ways, and then it'll be very hard for people and other external powers to put pressure on a country like Indonesia to actually restrict their trade, since a lot of things will flow through that area. And I think just another final spot we look at is Nigeria, being a major population center, and just the way that trade can circulate from there, perhaps between global south parts of Africa and South America. If that actually becomes established, the more it gets connected, the harder it becomes to break apart. So, yeah.
If I may just add a thing to what Shu was saying, because this is basically the only thing I wanted to point out, which, you know, especially when you look on this map, it's kind of self-evident, because it's interesting to note that the founding members of BRICS are all, shall we say, regional hegemons. Like they have their sphere of influence. They are definitely like one of the biggest countries where they reside. So, you know, India and China, despite their proximity, you can see there's a clear divide there, that they have their sphere of influence and the other sphere of influence, likewise with Russia. Now, if you look then at South Africa, it is actually one of the most more popular, in that part of the continent, South Africa is unmatched, basically. It's definitely the natural regional power there. The same goes for Brazil. In Latin America, the size of Brazil, by virtue of its size, makes it the natural powerhouse in that region. And as you mentioned, Shu, Nigeria, the same goes for Nigeria. A population of over 200 million people. It's a rising economy that is, you know, it has a lot of issues, but it is increasingly stabilizing from decades of military dictatorship and corporatocracy. And the same goes for, you look at the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Both of them are in a sense peers when you want to kind of compare them in that region. They're sort of like India and China, and I think that is the biggest challenge actually. Like once that one is unlocked, alongside with the like Egypt, which is a regional power of Northern Africa, once those are unlocked, BRICS will be consolidated, and I think they will be consolidated because if you can get Iran and Saudi Arabia to find a system that makes them have a mutually beneficial interaction, that it will strengthen their bond, you can use that model, or at least adapt that model to other more contentious area of the world. And this is why what Bad Cat was mentioning, like it's gonna be an alternative, but it's not really gonna have to try to go after the West. It's just gonna be more and more countries acting in their own self-interest, seeing that, hey, if I go to an agreement with these guys, it's actually I'm still gonna have quite a lot of liberty, but I also have some security in case of sanctions or whatnot. So yeah, I'm not going to ramble on too much. I think it's just a lot of good points by all of my fellow panelists. I have to thank you for your contribution.
I want to give you my point of view about this question, because I haven't.
About that, Shadowy. Let's go move on. I'm kidding.
I think BRICS is not going to evolve as a classic international organization, but more as a trade association. In the sense of it's going to try to stay with very few rules and very few leaders at the top. They are going to have the maximum of the minimum of internal organization to avoid to create some kind of his own power. Like sometime we have in the best example of this problem would be European Union, who has become a power in itself, independently of the member of the European Union. And I think the BRIC doesn't want that. So if you create more a trade association than an international organization, it's not the same thing. And for the people, it's not going to be the same thinking. Okay? In association, everybody has the same right, basically. There is no big leaders, there is no big administration, there is no such thing. If you create an national organization, you are going to create committee, you are going to create an assembly, You are going to create a summit. Of course, you are going to have that, but you are going to create a lot of structure and infrastructure about it. And I think the BRICS are going to try to avoid it because it's expensive and because it creates its own interest at some point. That's what I think for the economical and the political side. And I think it's going to not have an army in itself, but they are going to create some rules to allow intervention if a country asks for help, for humanitarian reason or maybe for internal trouble. Like we have seen in Kazakhstan, I think it was, when they asked help from Russia at a point a few years ago, or things like that. It's going to be more an intervention protocol than a standing army. That's what I think. Any comment?
I would like to say something. Yes, Chadov, you're right. Let's not forget the BRICS already exists since 2009 exactly, and yes, they still don't have an organization.
Yes.
So the way they meet is pretty much similar to the G7 or the G20, with more engagement in a way, because they created an institution like.
And I don't think they're going to have a
organization.
We're thinking
exactly.
about some kind of forum where everybody could speak about his own problem.
Exactly.
I'm not so sure about that.
Yes,
I think it's not going to happen.
I would pull up something very interesting Coping said, because it's like not the whole world will be able to get inside of BRICS either. We see many people trying to join, but we'll have countries, they have at least two characteristics I think very important. One of them, like Coping was saying, they are rich in commodities, commodity-rich countries. Secondly, they are countries with huge industrial capacity, which we are seeing. It's actually Indonesia, India, China, and in the case of Africa, it would be Ethiopia and perhaps Egypt, and another one big industrial country will be Argentina as well. It has a big capacity of becoming a bit more industrial inside of South America. I also think Coping saying Latin America, it's not so correct, but this is just a little thing. It's Latin America. It's South America. Brazil is very powerful in South America. For Latin America, thinking about the Spanish countries, I think Mexico has a more attractive power than Brazil has. It's very regional, yeah.
Yeah, you might be more correct. It might be also a matter of semantics, but the neighbors of Brazil are never going to overpower Brazil, and that's kind of what I'm referring to as regional power. And the same would be so in North America. That's where I would place Mexico, and the regional power there. The natural one is indisputably the United States, and so Mexico is by virtue of being the next door neighbor of the United States, not the natural dominant powerhouse there. And so that's what I was referring to when I mentioned Brazil and the location. And it's when you look at the BRICS member countries, if you look at where they are, these are countries that are not going to be taken out by their neighbors anytime soon. So that was what I was.
But it's quite interesting that Mexico wants to get inside of BRICS as well.
Yes.
You see? Actually, if we think about Latin America, you have two big ones, not just one. If we talk about South America, then it's Brazil, undoubtedly. It's a country that has an immense capacity of attraction. But for the Spanish people, like when we think about Latin America, because Brazilians don't see themselves as Latins. When we think about Latin America and more the Spanish countries, then actually Mexico has more power of attraction, and its area of influence goes actually also to the south of America a bit. Many of these countries in the north of South America, many people immigrate to Mexico What part
Okay.
from Mexico to go
And when we look at the trajectory of the United States, I guess there won't be too many decades before they try to apply and try to get
So,
loans. And
about the United States, I'm going to close part of both
I think
Can I
it's
just
BRICS.
give a quick
And since you were
comment
speaking
on?
about United States, it's a good point to transit to
yeah.
NATO.
Badcap wanted to say something, so if he could.
No,
Oh,
just
sorry.
to close quickly on the
Yes.
fact that on the increasing the members of BRICS. I don't think this is really their purpose, and don't forget that it's kind of a fine line that they've thread. You have to view the BRICS country in with the lens of the US, right? The opposition to the US. If you want to join BRICS, you have to look at, okay, are you able to basically say F off to the US? Can you be completely unaligned and independent? So that's one big thing. And the second thing is you shouldn't be too martial or militaristic, in the sense that if you get someone in BRICS who is very violent or aggressive, then it's not going to work out. Like BRICS right now, they're not like aggressive, right? They're not conquering the world. Like,
You mean like
I'll
Russia?
this is a provocation. I mean, that's another topic, but that's a provocation from the US. And like, if Russia would have put like anything in Mexico, the US would have replied the same way. So this is something else. But before that, like, they were not overly aggressive, right? You could have China go everywhere, right? You could have the other countries do the same. They're not. You could have India invade Pakistan and do all these kind of things. They're not. So you need to view like this. I don't think this alliance is made to grow exponentially, because as I agree with Shadowy, they're not going to want to do that like the European Union, which completely failed. So yeah, just that.
Okay. So, NATO, no. I think we are going to start with coping. I think he's jealous about the introduction of Poita for BRICS. So, coping, your turn. About NATO in 5 years.
Now, NATO in 5 years. I think I have to come with a disclaimer here, which I didn't come with an introduction. I'm from Norway, which is a NATO member, and I have an overt bias. I am against NATO as an institution because, and I will thus explain.
I'm going to tell you a secret. I think everybody here is against NATO.
Yeah, but I have a particular hatred for that institution. Okay. So, but I won't elaborate on that. I will. It's just so you can understand when I'm giving the prediction that it is flavored by a whole lot of bias here. So, my impression is that in the same way that the notion of NATO being a defense alliance is, this is not a remarkable statement. Nobody even considers it like that unless you're really on the hoo-ha team. The same way, more people, I think, are recognizing that NATO is not an alliance. It is an instrument of control. And I think the best example of that is Germany. Like, it's, and, I'm not going to mention pipelines and stuff. I think that is redundant at this point. There are so many other things. So, long story short, I think we are seeing the cracks in NATO already. And I think within 5 years, if we haven't seen a country that has already exited NATO, we will see the first country who is overtly considering it seriously, like taking serious steps and like showing now we're done with this. We're either taking our own little regional alliance or we're going side off with, if you're close to Russia, maybe they're just going to say out of NATO, let's have a neutrality pact with, something like that. I think we will see within 5 years. And, after that, once the first member, and maybe I should point this out, I don't want to elaborate too much, but I think it matters quite a lot which kind of member chooses to go first. So if it is a small one, then we will see, like, let's say it's Hungary, just to make an example. Then it will still take time before NATO dissolves, but we will then concretely see the beginning of the end. If it is let's say by a stretch of political shifts occur over 5 years, and it's Germany or France, then I think the implosion of NATO is much more likely to see. But if that would happen, I could, that would only be me coping for the most advantageous situation I would like to see. So that's, I think I'll just stop it there and pass it on to my fellows.
Okay, Poita, you want to point, what do you think?
Well, we see that NATO objective was to keep Russia out from the beginning. And it is a military defense alliance from the beginning, more or less, but always with the very objective of keeping the communist ideology out of Europe. So if we study a bit the story of NATO, we see how actually NATO had little wars with communist parties all over Europe. And when the Soviet Union fell down, NATO had a hard time in adapting and become actually an offensive institution, because the bigger threat, which was Russia, at least during the Yeltsin and the first mandate of Putin, Russia was a very easygoing country where almost all the Western countries could do whatever they wanted to the prices they wanted. So everything was great. But then we had the Yugoslavia war, and that was where a very bad sign started. Yugoslavia war, the invasion of Iraq, the invasion of Afghanistan, Libya, and although the problem is that for Europeans, many people believe in this kind of idea that NATO is a defensive institution, but the rest of the world doesn't see it anymore. Actually, we see an institution that expands, that wants to expand. It's already trying to get inside of the Indo-Pacific area now, and this is creating, the war in Yugoslavia is shameful. There are a lot of theories. They even say many of these conflicts were created artificially by NATO. At least from Kosovo, there are a lot of proofs of that. How the conflict was instigated from outside, from some countries of NATO, but actually always with the intention of NATO invading that part of the country. Why NATO needed to get that little bit of nothing that has landlocked, that has no economic interest? It's still an enigma for me today, but perhaps the non-enigma, an obvious case, was the destruction of a country, Serbia. Well, it was a bit stopped by Russia back then, but let's go on. So the idea that NATO is an instrument of control is in somehow coping is right by the fact that from the beginning it was an instrument of control against the communist ideology. And now what we see is NATO evolving, adapting to the new times. It was a bit of a dead weight there for a while. Even when they become almost an instrument of power from some Western countries, it didn't evolve that well. And now we see they develop very much. They are a very good instrument of propaganda, of combating new ideas that can put in danger some institutions like European Union or the visibility of the United States in Europe, and so on. So in 5 years, we may see big transformations in the European Union, and they will introduce into differences in NATO itself. So when Coping was talking about Hungary and probably even other parts of Europe, like France, could also get out of the European Union if Marine Le Pen could come to power. Well, very, very theoretically. Very theoretically.
Not going to happen.
No, she talked about it, so we have to take that in consideration.
No.
Then we would see big difference as well inside of NATO. But as for myself, what I see is that NATO will try to oblige countries that belong to NATO, but they don't belong to the European Union, to get inside of the European Union. We may even see the EFTA, because Norway is not European Union, it's NATO, and it belongs to a small institution, which actually Portugal was also part of, which is EFTA. And I think the lasting countries belonging to EFTA will be forced to get inside of the European Union. And as we also see the idea of bringing Ukraine, it's very complicated. So the point to imagine what NATO will become in 5 years, it will depend a lot of how the Ukrainian war will develop. We will in 5 years still have a conflict in Ukraine, then NATO will be strong. Will the conflict will be loosed earlier, then NATO will start to fall apart for many reasons. Economically, Europe is completely devastated economically. And if we keep seeing developing countries growing up, they will start having a problem, especially in paying for commodities, because like if we see BRICS a little bit as a commodity alliance, they will do everything for commodities to start being paid for their right price. And for that, the European Union will have to find a new developing model, which is not based on cheap energy and cheap commodities. Yes, a country getting out like Hungary, it's quite possible, but I don't see Hungary getting out just of NATO. They will get out of NATO and get out of the European Union, and they probably will bring more countries with them. So that's that would be my perception. Also, I would like to say that NATO will try to, if NATO falls, if the war in Ukraine is solved like in 2 years or 1 year even, NATO will try to find a new kind of Trojan horse. And that's where I see it very dangerous. And that will be probably green energy or climate change, like accusing a country of destroying the nature, of making...
You don't see a chance of focus to Asia?
Ecocide, sorry again?
You don't think they are going to try to focus on Asia?
They are trying to expand. That was my first point.
No, not
NATO
to
is
expand,
expanding.
to focus.
They're
going to try to fight against China, not only Russia, but China. I don't think they will
get support. I don't think you get support. If you look at the ASEAN countries, the meetings, the meeting of foreign ministers, the ministerial summit, you had it in Jakarta just a few days ago. The foreign minister and even the president of Indonesia, they were very clear. They don't want to be part in a war. So I think there is not a climate in Asia for kind of NATO expansion. They might kind of discursively support the US, but there would be no support for imported conflicts, I believe. But Shu would be better to explain, to give us a good perception of that.
Yeah, I can speak on that. So I think, like, I agree with like the model and things we've discussed about how NATO has changed from a capitalist anti-communist alliance, expanded into a European collective, but then now it's kind of going into international adventurism. So I think even if you look at past events, for example, the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003, you had some NATO countries that were quite enthusiastic about intervention, about adventurism beyond the borders of Europe. But then you even had countries like Turkey that refused the U.S. permission to use their Air Force bases to strike northern Iraq, right? So you kind of get to this point where if you drag a defensive alliance and you try to transplant it and drag every single member into a place in the Asia Pacific, wherever the conflict will start, it might be quite difficult. Because even with Ukraine, the response was initially quite slow. It wasn't as unanimous, and it needed a lot of prompting and time to develop. So it really will depend on the appetite of the European people, their politicians, and also their economies. Because if they do try to drag it into the Asia Pacific area, wherever the conflict is, they'll be disadvantaged by geography, they'll be disadvantaged by population. And as we can see from the Ukraine conflict, like they're already, especially the European countries, quite disadvantaged from industrial output. So the pivot to Asia will be interesting. It might be led by a few enthusiastic countries, maybe the US and the United Kingdom. But if the countries do have some semblance of analyzing their own cost benefit, a lot of the European countries will look at these conflicts and say, like, maybe we can help, but maybe not in a military way. And this could cause some fractures within like NATO's kind of infrastructure itself. Because if NATO doesn't act as a collective, it loses a lot of its kind of hard power. It can do soft power, but that'll be through another mechanism. And Europe is kind of falling behind in some aspects in that way. So Asia is very interesting. I think one thing that's being talked about recently is expansion, or at least dialogue between NATO and establishing offices in either Japan, South Korea. I think these two countries may be able to participate since they do have American influence, not only economic, but physical American hard assets there. They would be more likely to participate than probably most European countries, like in any kind of intervention, even if it does not involve China. So I think we'll have to watch carefully. There could be some major fracture points that could kind of break things apart. But at the same time, there could be some expansion points, and then NATO will have to change. It'll have to change its kind of purpose beyond just a defensive alliance in Europe against a Eastern threat, but a defensive alliance for a collective Western objective and trade bloc, which might look a bit more like fulfilling the goals and securing the interests of countries in the G7 and the EU rather than just Europe.
Okay. Bad Cat, you thinking about everything we speak about?
Yeah, so about NATO, I'm not going to comment. I think we all agree on the usefulness of the alliance and all, but just a few things. Should remember that the origin of NATO is what, right? It was during the Cold War. It's an alliance to counter the influence of Russia. Okay, so when you think about expanding NATO membership, I mean, why would you even go to Asia? There's no reason, right? So the second thing is, when it started, it was about the safety of the nuclear deterrent from the US, right? It's all those smaller countries who didn't have access to nuclear power, who were sitting next to Russia and were afraid and wanted to have that kind of protection offered by the NATO alliance. So that's just some context to try to, project yourself in the next 5 years, 10 years, and try to see, I don't see an expansion. I think NATO was dead, right, before the war in Ukraine. Kind of had a resurgence and acquired new countries quickly because of the war and the increased sentiment of insecurity and kind of nakedness in front of Russia territorial expansion. But it's not going to go anywhere from here. It is the existing members know how complex it is to navigate within NATO. See the complexity of the politics now with in France, in Germany, they didn't want this war. They wanted to stop this war. They couldn't. They were stuck. They had to continue. So they all realized the limit of the alliance. So I don't think that NATO is going to grow much bigger than that. There's going to be a big test on how we're getting out of this war. And NATO is going to be judged also by how they get out of it. But no, I don't think that they're going to grow. Absolutely not in Asia. They're going to stay maybe a bit more alive than before, but not be something that is going to expand further.
Okay, I'm going to give you to tell you what I think about NATO. First, I hope that in 5 years the Ukraine war is going to be finished. And I think it's going to be very hard for NATO, but it's not going to be the end of it, because this war has shown to the west side of Europe that there is something to fear from the east. And NATO, this job is to protect the west side of Europe against this fear. So it's going to stay here, just to make sure that the European country could sleep at night, basically. But there is a big problem with NATO. I think it was a big mistake to accept Finland and Sweden, because like we are seeing now with Turkey, each time they are going to try to make a decision, the USA basically are going to need to buy the approbation not only of Turkey but of Sweden and Finland too, because Finland, the Finnish people, they are very afraid of Russian, of course, but they have really their own idea about a lot of subjects, and it's the same thing for Sweden. The Swedish people are really neutral in their own mind, very independent, and they are not going to accept a military solution for everything like NATO may sometimes want to do. And if we have Sweden and Swedish, there is no longer to be something like Kosovo or things like that. Or USA are going to pay a lot of things to Finnish and Sweden people to make them accept another Kosovo war. So I think the acceptation of new country, each new country that NATO accepts, is a step in the direction of NATO neutralization as an organization. They are going to grow, I think. Some small country, I don't know where, but I think they are going to grow, and each new country is going to paralyze a little more the organization. That's what I think. The question?
I wanted to kind of add to that with what you're saying there. That is, I think you're absolutely correct. On 2 points, 2 accounts that I wanted to respond to. One is the alliance and the fear from the East, and I can only just speak from the perspective as a Norwegian. The propagandization is very entrenched in that regard. People have like this implicit fear, and this was before the Ukraine war. This was for a long time. It's been like that. So I think you're correct. It's going to still have a lot of popular support that will consolidate it. So it's not going to just implode anytime soon. Even though there will be some, like I said, I do expect some official statements that will kind of hint very clearly that the unity is faltering. And on the point of adding new members, I think you're also absolutely correct, especially when it comes to Sweden and Finland, who were in effect really NATO members already. They had already action plans ready. They already had a lot of standardization with their arms industry, so they're very easy to merge. But it's the instability that is caused. Just look at Turkey, how much problems they've had to get through with Turkey. And now they have managed to bribe Turkey, allowing them to kind of basically have at it with the Turks, without getting so much flack. Well, this is going to be painting a picture as well, alongside with now they're going to have to, next war, it's like Batcat and Shu pointed out, it's going to be hard to kind of get this initially anti-Russian coalition to kind of wander halfway across the globe. I mean, it's done so before because
it's not possible.
Because before it did so, but this have been relatively weakened countries. They've already been hammered by economic sanctions. Militarily speaking, they were really no match. But this, like Taiwan, it's almost laughable if it wasn't tragically, horrifically possible. It's I just wanted to make that addition there without hogging too much time. If I may, though, if nobody else have anything to add, I wanted to ask a question to Shu and Batcat. But Felt, I see you're having your fingers up, so please go ahead.
So I wanted to comment on what Chadovi said. I think it was very good placed. But you see, Chadovi, I don't think NATO makes their members safe. It's the opposite, because they create a friction where there could be a global security. Merkel said that many times. You can't have a security structure in Europe without Russia. And they are going to build everything against Russia for a while. They're going to try. And this is going to fail because the insecurity that it comes from it is too high. And I was going to see, for instance, Finland joining NATO. As you said, it was a big mistake. A big mistake for that country as well.
But you are making a mistake. You are thinking about reality. I'm thinking about feeling.
Yes.
For the reality, you are right, okay? Everybody here agrees that NATO is bad for peace. But for the feeling, it's really reassuring to have a US AWACS,
I
US
don't know.
tankers, US aircraft carrier, and so on.
Yeah, that's what I was trying. Yeah, but I'm giving you the same feeling. That it's going to turn a nightmare than more than a good feeling for some people to sleep well. Actually, they will sleep on constant fear, because you can't just have a security structure in Europe, architecture in Europe, a security architect in Europe, if Russia plays along. If Russia doesn't play along, it's insecurity all the time. And this is, I was going to give, like, for instance, even economically, how this is going to be very bad. Finland, for instance, the model of development is degrading very rapidly. That country is going to fall into depression for most probably the first time in their life. And they lost almost all the niche of development they had before, which was actually lately Nokia. After Nokia kind of disintegrated, it still exists, but not as important as an institution, as an enterprise like before, as a corporation. It created some niches, but now they're all falling down because they cut it themselves with Russia, losing one of their biggest markets. Norway, for instance, their north is very dependent. I think is Keynes, the city, is very dependent on the commerce with Russia. And one of the things I sometimes read about the newspaper locally is that how people were afraid that the Russians would stop coming, the ships, because without the fish from Russia, that area would lose completely their economical viability. And we are talking about one of the most northern cities in Norway. So this is also important to see how actually in the borderline of the NATO, this insecurity, this bad trade, there will create a lot of problems. And also the Baltic countries, they actually were very dependent on the commerce between the European Union and Russia. So I see there a bit of not safe, but the other way around. And the other way as well is that, you see, the neocolonialism is back. I think the first neocolonial is when the British decide to make war against slavery, and they're occupying countries around the world to combat slavery. Although they were some of the worst slavers in the history of the world. And then the United States also pick it up. Then they have their anti-communist neocolonialism and democracy. And now we are going to find a new one, which will be the climate change. And I think NATO. That was the last part I wanted to say in my previous presentation, was that I think NATO will redefine itself more than being against the East Shadowy, because that doesn't pay off. I don't see it paying off, creating instability all the time. They will create an idea of ecocide. They will be the new defenders of ecology. And I can imagine, you see, you can't occupy a country anymore.
Yes,
well,
but to do that, you are going to need to make sure that Turkey, Finland, Sweden, and all the other ones agree with you.
Oh, no. I'm talking about the whole world. Ecocide. So NATO will attack countries that commit ecocide, for instance. I can imagine NATO...
But to attack a country, they are going to need the approbation of everybody.
Oh, come on. They did it before.
Yes.
Actually,
it was easy.
If I may interject,
no, it's not going to be easy.
I get what Plata is saying, but note also how many times the United States went ahead and then maybe NATO came afterwards, after the fact. So it's I don't think you're entirely mistaken by saying NATO, but what Shadow is saying is that you're not necessarily going to get NATO along on an invasion course or anything like that. This thing about sending weapons to Ukraine, that's a pretty tall order for most NATO countries. Also, if I may respond, since you were so kind to reference my region of the country, because I am from northern Norway, and I'm not from the most northernmost part, but so this is not like very interesting on a geopolitical scale, but I would like to just point out, since I can from the grounds here, that northern Norway has for a very long time had an issue with depopulation. So first of all, it's urbanization, where the county capitals are the only ones having any significant growth. But as a whole, the population has been moving southwards. And to kind of give a picture how bad the situation is, lately, the vast majority of immigrants from our region are actually immigrants. Those who have immigrated first found out they don't have enough opportunity or something like that, and they go southwards. And the further north you go, the more the more dependent you become on certain industries, and it takes a special kind of person to want to be in those areas. And this situation with Russia, for example, like Piotr pointed out, it just exacerbates an already spiraling problem that we have here in the north, which is continuous depopulation. Like, we cannot even hold our immigrants. They just go southwards to the cities where they have larger communities and more opportunities for jobs and so forth. Whereas the economic decline becomes, and this of course goes for shall we say, the indigenous one. And when I say indigenous, I don't mean just like ethnic Norwegians like myself from the county capital, but also the Laplanders, who are by every definition are Norwegian as well. They have been with us for thousands of years. So being within this state, they also have encountered the same problem, where their old industries cannot actually sustain their population, and they try to find also alternatives. Not everyone want to go around with reindeer, for example, or chop wood and stuff. So they go southwards, and the trade with Russia being disrupted, well, that just causes more problem, like less opportunities for people up there. So I'm not going to ramble on too much more. I just wanted to just appreciate that people kind of recognize that we are a very vulnerable part of the country, right up against the border to a very strong neighbor, whose trade also, I want to point out, they are our neighbors. Like these people in northern Russia, they're not like rest of Russia. Russia is so huge, you cannot really view it like that. And we have a lot of cross-border trade and interactions, and so it's there's a lot of implications that I hope are rectified after this war. But I have to say that I struggle to be optimistic, but I'll try. I just want to say that. So thanks for referencing Northern Norway, and thank you everyone for giving me the latitude to explain.
Just wanted to add one comment on NATO and the US. One thing we have to understand is the US is in a very different position from 30 or 40 years ago. They don't have the willingness or the ability to make war outside their country, right? So whereas the public support for wars is at the lowest level possible, they don't even have the capability now. All the recent operations they've been involved in have been total disasters. So it's a very different world than 30 or 40 years ago, where the US could intervene and send armies anywhere, and everyone knew that, right?
You are forgetting
now,
Vietnam Wars.
Yeah, but again, this was total disaster, and it didn't achieve anything. So right now, if you are in a region of the world where there's a conflict and you think the US is going to do something, they're not.
I know what you're thinking.
And Trump, when he was in power, was clear about that. But even if they change with Biden, the approach has not changed, right? They retreated from Afghanistan. They're going to go to recenter on their own country and their political interests. So they're going to defend their own interests when they are at risk, but they're not going to be able to police the world like they've been doing in the past. So it's a very different situation.
You think they are going to let China to go over them? I don't think so.
Hold on. Why do you think there's going to be an open conflict with China?
Not open, but there is going to be some kind of conflict. There is already some kind of conflict.
More economical, I presume, because I don't see Taiwan playing off.
Proxy war somewhere.
Yes.
Yes, proxy wars, yes.
But I don't think there's any willingness to have of course, it's a cold economic war between the US and China, right? We are talking about the dollar, the dollar king, right? And that's what's happening behind the European war. It's the war on the dollar, and it's not going well. So that's what the new war is. It's not going to be like troops, operate US troops in foreign lands. It's just what I'm saying.
Oh, I think you're right. There is not going to be US foreign troops. They're going to try to use some proxies, some other people.
Of course.
I have a question for Shu and Bad Cat. No, I have asked Shu this before, but I think it's relevant in the context of what we've been discussing, even from the beginning, when it comes to like, is there going to be like a military institution with the BRICS nations and so forth? And I think it's actually a good question to kind of bring to you guys, because there were a lot of talks in the lounge, for example, about joint military operations. Whenever that happened, it tends to attract some attention. And I wondered, like, what is your take? I think maybe Shu, maybe you did it on a test recording, but if you could, give your what does it mean? Like, what should a person who is not from Asia, how should we perceive these joint military exercises? Interpret it. Answer as you please.
Yeah, sure. So I think from an external point of view, it can be quite confusing, because you see countries like China and India who have border conflicts, and then they're meeting, they're cooperating, they're doing joint exercises, sometimes with third parties like Russia. But a lot of these exercises are actually not exactly meant to be exercising a defense or an attack against somebody else. A lot of it is actually due to like the organization called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also some other alliances. When countries exercise with each other, there are other goals. One goal is that you can actually familiarize yourself with each other, so that you actually know how we operate. You can understand how different countries communicate, and you can also understand like where different countries are interested in. There's dialogue, and when you talk to each other, exercise together, use each other's radios, you can actually promote and de-escalate some misunderstandings, as opposed to back in the Cold War model, when different countries would send ecological satellites, balloons, different things, and everybody would panic. Now, if you actually cooperate and talk, you can actually figure out things before they actually get into a hot conflict. I think the second point is Asia and Eurasia in general is quite a large area. And within that large area, as we've seen with all the insurgencies, rebellions, different kinds of conflicts that don't arise from state actors, just simply having a organization where that people can talk about security, intelligence, counterterrorism is quite useful. So yes, throughout Southeast Asia, throughout the Middle East, throughout Central Asia, even in East Asia, there are various non-state actors which have the potential to cause violence. And then just having an organization and an approach to dealing with it and a way of supporting each other could promote stability, which is more favorable than, for example, like a misinterpretation that an action against a rebellion on a border conflict is actually a move to escalate and attack a neighboring country. So
if I may interrupt you there, because everything you're saying there is from what I am accustomed to in a country where military exercises are explicitly for attacking an insert country, right? What you're saying is that military exercises is, to avoid miscommunication and border tensions, to be able to deal with cross-border issues like non-state actors that are armed, and just have general stability, just get along. It's a very it's kind of like, I understand more why I was so confused about seeing you have China and India, for example, and I could think that maybe this border thingy is maybe just like a political football and maybe not really that serious. And I think there is probably some credence to that. But then when you're explaining the way these military exercises, what their purposes are, it makes a whole lot more sense why these two countries will have exercises. They won't have exercises to actually fight each other. They will have exercises to avoid fighting each other, which is
yes. And I'm going to cut you
cool,
because the clock is running and we have to begin to do the closing now.
Yeah. If Bad Cat had anything to add, I would like to hear it.
Very shortly, please.
Yeah. Just quickly. Yes, I agree with what you said. These countries are growing massive armies. These armies need to gain experience, and there's nothing better than apart from live action, but like this training, it's here to grow in experience, to also flex their muscles, right? Now they're showing the world their forces. And the other thing is, while they do that, don't forget that all these BRICS countries, they are massively behind in terms of development, right? They want and they need to grow as quick as possible, as fast as possible. They have huge potential of still, and they need to achieve those potentials. So they can't do that if they go to war, right? So I think they're doing everything they can to actively avoid going to war, and building a strong military is helping there, right? But I think they want stability, they want trade, they want an alternative to the US, but then they don't want war. So I think they are a force for stability in the world.
Okay, so we are doing closing now. Shu, any last word? Shu, please, do you have a closing?
Yeah, I think it was a great discussion. We touched on a lot of points from reindeer to expanding NATO into Asia. Very interesting. But I think the main thing to watch is these next few years are very important because it shows both the economic ascension of the BRICS nations, and also we can see like the security stability within the West. And depending on what happens with how the Ukraine war is resolved, if there's going to be another dialectical world where it's one bloc against another bloc, but at the same time, the opposing side that is narrated in the West is actually aiming to be a non-oppositional collective group, then we truly will enter a multipolar world. As opposed to if NATO or the West decides to pivot in Ukraine, then maybe we'll fall back to status quo. So I would say watch it carefully and watch how countries react, and we will have a very interesting coming 5 to 10 years. That's my closing statement.
Okay, Coping, a closing, please.
So I want to thank you very much, Adobe, for hosting this recording. I also want to commend you for wise choices of including Shu and Badcat, because for the people who we hope this recording here will be going public, and for people who are watching, this is actually like a European subgroup. But you see, Europe doesn't really operate in a bubble. So having these special guests, shall we say, over with us to kind of really get the wider perspective is, it's very conducive for a person like me to have Shu and Badcat give, from the other side of the world, and still it kind of relates to us. I'm not going to come with so many predictions on the topic because I want to save time and focus on letting people who are watching understand that this is you may have noticed Wyatt is peculiarly absent. And one of the reasons is because, he has time constraints. And we want to have these discussions, and interactions with, not only because we like to talk about these things with each other, but we also want to record it so you get the opportunity to kind of interact with us as well. You probably, maybe we missed something, maybe there's more you want us to talk about, maybe you got some insightful comments and so forth. Maybe you want to participate in these. And to which that end, I will end my closing with saying that you should first and foremost press the like button and subscribe to DPA. Second, you can come to the open mic, where you can find it a little bit more chaotic, but I think with this recording you can see that we can also get together when the stream is over and go a little bit more focused at work. And finally, I would like to thank Badcat for coming on. Badcat, you people should understand, he's a very interesting exception here, because people who are in the lounge, he's not a part of the lounge, but he is now a part of DPA. He has not been on the open mic, and he has tried but not had the possibility. Yet he has, through vouching and by basically being a decent person, come on here. And, I hope everyone appreciated his attendance as much as I did. And that the people, this is to those in the lounge. I hope you will consider maybe having Badcat admitted, as the fact of the matter is he has shown his face, he is standard for his opinion, deliberated exactly as we expect people to do on an open mic. Better still, he has stayed focused on topic, on a panel of sorts, right? So, I think there's a lot to consider for those of you watching. If you want to participate, don't hesitate about commenting. I know I will read them and come. And yeah, thank you so much to Prata also. Prata, when you're in this kind of environment, that's awesome because you like to kind of get the details and get
And that is Prata turn.
And
You are too long.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you see, that's why I wasn't going to come with predictions. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and thank you all my fellow panelists for having this talk and recording with me. And thank you, Shadowy, for the screen walking and hosting.
So, it is very interesting that we have today two different institutions. One is the old one that is trying to find its new way into this new world that is coming, which is NATO, and the other one, which is BRICS, where so many people have so many expectations, and we want to project our expectations in that institution as well, which is quite legitimate. Nevertheless, what this institution really is or can become. So it's also interesting we try to predict the future, how we see this. And I would say that like these two institutions represent another type of institutions as well. So we have many other institutions, young institutions coming, the SEO, the Mercosur, the Turkic-speaking countries, the Eurasian Association, and so on. And these institutions have been gaining momentum before, but extremely after the pandemic. And after, because the Western countries kind of closed themselves in lockdowns, stopped communicating, went into a very big selfishness about having resources for themselves. And then after the Ukrainian war, they came back imposing and using and manipulating all the institutions for their own interest, for their own gains, actually blocking everything. And we are talking about United Nations, we are talking about International Monetary Fund, where countries were refused to be given loans if they didn't negotiated their loans with China or stopped dealing with Russia. Whatever, we saw that in the Olympics now as well. The Olympics is stopped with gender ideas or with blocking some countries, something that never happened even during the Cold War. The Olympics was like this neutral place where everything yes. Please. And please. I think we have, when Shu was talking about development, the problem about development is that these countries want to develop and want to grow up, and Black Cat as well, but they will be blocked. And they will be blocked by the West imposing green energy to those countries, which is very difficult to develop and is very expensive. Ecological taxes, which are coming into the European Union very soon, which means it's a way of taxing the products of these countries more expensive into the European Union. And what I was saying about NATO, the accusations of ecocide, which will also become a big conflict problem in the future. But the solution is another one. They can't go through that way. The solution for the West is try to find a new narrative where they fit in this new world, where everybody is trying to develop, where everybody is trying to actually just very simple, to have a better way of life. And of course, each country has their fixations. The big countries of the BRICS, like Bad Cat was saying, they have their interests at their hearts at first, and that's it. But smaller countries also have their interests on their hearts, and that's the potential that so many people is projecting, that's the expectation that so many people are projecting the BRICS. They want to find a forum where they actually can do that in the more neutral way without being punished with green energy, ecological taxes, and accusations of ecocide.
Okay, so, Bad Cat, your closing, please.
Yeah, so, well, I won't go back into debate. So I'll just say I'm very happy to have been invited. Thanks for the invitation, Shadowy, to this open mic. Thanks for the kind words, Coping, and thanks to Prata and Shu for participating in the panel and sharing your very nice opinions. I think that's very impressed first by the quality of the panel, because I think we all have different backgrounds and different stories and different opinions, and that's what makes the experience great, right? It's not like we're all not saying white. We're bringing different perspective and different opinions on the same topics. And I think that's what makes the the whole discussion very interesting. So thank you again for allowing me to participate. We covered like a few topics today, but I think that some of the next one will be interesting as well. I'd love to suggest things around technology, because we've seen the craziness around AI. Like what some of the next war are going to involve, cybersecurity, AI, government AI entity, and I'm in the middle of it as part of my job. So this is going to be very interesting to discuss as well. So maybe in the next open mic session.
Okay, so my own closure now. I think we have to be careful about the notion of 5 years. For European people, 5 years is a very long time. But for Asia, it's a very short one. So I think that in 5 years, there's going to be some change, but not as much as we may think. Because for the de-dollarization, for instance, a lot of people think it's coming. Yes, it's coming, but it's slowly coming. I don't think there is going to be a big crash and dollar is going to go away in just a few weeks. That's not going to happen. It's things which is going to last for 10, 20, even 50 years. So 5 years is a very short time for the scale of the world. So we'll see, but I don't think there is coming as much change as we may fear or hope. We'll see. So I'm going to end the recording now.
Bye, everyone. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching us.
Bye-bye.
Comment on the down there.